So, James, Tottenham, who somehow are going to be in the Champions League next season, they've decided to swap Ange Postecoglou for Thomas Frank. Firstly, what do you make of that decision, your view of Thomas Frank, and what does the new season hold for Spurs?
Well, Thomas Frank is in a different position radically, I think, from Ange Postecoglou, because Postecoglou's gift to Spurs really was that he solved the conundrum of how much do you want to win a trophy. It became an existential issue for Spurs through the whole of the last season, particularly the second half of last season. They hadn't won anything for 17 years. They've got one of the best stadiums in the world. They've got one of the best training grounds in the world. They don't have anything really to show for it, certainly not since 2008. And I think the fan base was probably split over that. Some of them would, want to go and win something bigger than the Europa League. We're just winning something for the sake of winning something is not the answer. But I think there were a significant number of those supporters who just wanted to celebrate something. They wanted something tangible. They wanted to win. And you saw that with the really bizarre situation of a manager who kind of, I think, knew he was getting sacked from probably quite a long way out, or certainly felt the writing was on the wall, being celebrated and cheered by thousands and thousands of supporters who lined the streets of North London for a trophy parade. It's bizarre. It's an incredibly strange thing to experience, that you've got this manager who's lifted this psychological weight off the club, that has grappled with Spursiness being entered into the football lexicon of this team that can't win, they cannot get over the line, that they falter when the prize is within sight. They go from that to winning. Okay, it's not the Champions League, it's not the Premier League, but it's a serious trophy, the Europa League. Obviously, it brings with it financial rewards, it brings with it Champions League football. But what it does is it validates Spurs as a club. It gives them a different definition of themselves. And that is the greatest gift that Postecoglou has given Thomas Frank. And in a way, it's both helpful and unhelpful, because Thomas Frank himself is stepping up from Brentford. This is with all respect to Brentford. Tottenham are a much bigger club. The expectations are different. And now they know what winning feels like. That kind of door has been opened. And so there probably is a little bit more expectation, almost born from the fact that they were so bad last season that in Premier League that it can't be like that again. There is a sort of feeling that normality will be restored, a balance will be restored to their play. But Spurs essentially were asking themselves, how much do we want to win a trophy? Is it worth everything? Some of the fans felt the answer to that was yes. Unfortunately for Postecoglou, Daniel Levy, Joe Lewis and the board felt no, it wasn't. And it was really significant, I think, that in the statement that Spurs released, which was very unusually detailed when a manager departs. You've seen them yourself. So quite often sometimes they're just, thank you very much for your service, goodbye. This was a really detailed, and just occupies a special place in our hearts, as etched a new chapter in the club's history. But also, the most significant aspect of that statement was about competing on four fronts. And that was essentially a coded message for, we do not accept that we can just sort of sack off the Premier League. We could not take anything else seriously in pursuit of one trophy. We don't believe, as a football club, that is the way that we should run and we should approach our seasons. And it's, I was at Thomas Frank's unveiling, and I was out with the squad in Asia when they played Arsenal, and spent a little bit of time around some of the Tottenham lads, and that sense of competing on four fronts, that message was something that Frank was quite consistent with publicly and privately. Was, I recognise that this is not a cup team I'm inheriting here. This is not a team that is expecting to, okay, well, we can finish 10th in the league. If we win the FA Cup and go out of Europe early, great, brilliant, roll on to next season. They don't see it as that. Everything that Spurs have been building towards, the stadium, the training ground, everything we talked about, even the money they've invested in the squad, they want to be challenging for the Premier League. They want to be challenging for the Champions League. It's a big task, I think. It's a tall order from where they are to get there. But that is ultimately what Thomas Frank has been brought in to do.
I mean, just from a personal point of view, I think Thomas Frank is a terrific appointment. I think he's tactically astute. He's a fantastic communicator when he's sat in front of us. Everyone will have seen clips of him, how he handles the dressing room and how he addresses his players, after wins and defeats. I just think that in terms of all round, it's just a fantastic appointment for Spurs. But you mentioned there about having to compete on four fronts, and Ange, if he was on this podcast, would tell you that the injuries kind of ruined any chance that was possible last year. If they are going to challenge or compete on four fronts this year under Thomas Frank, have they done enough to that squad to allow them to do so? And if they haven't, where are the areas that they need to address before the deadline?
No, I mean, as it stands, no, they haven't. I mean, just on the injuries, there's been quite a significant overhaul of the medical department and sports science team. So they are looking at things away from just, players sort of individual situations. Having said that, I think the training program is also looked at, and clearly there was an acknowledgement internally that the style of football contributed to those injuries. It was a high intensity, the amount of sprints that those centre backs and defenders needed to put in going forward, coming back, the intensity of the pressing, the high line, all of that sort of stuff. It contributed to those injuries. And some would argue, Postecoglou would clearly disagree with this, that he was incompatible with both the pace and the intensity of the Premier League, that you couldn't really sustain that level of that sort of brand of football, if you like, over the course of the season, again, on four fronts. So I think, they don't feel as though, from what I can tell, I don't think there's a feeling that they need to radically overhaul the squad or massively improve the numbers, because they feel they'll suffer fewer injuries because of the other changes that they're making, if you see what I mean. Having said that, of course, they do recognise that they need more creativity. They've lost Son Heung-min, who's obviously, that is a huge, significant moment for Spurs. He's been there 10 years. He was club captain. He was an absolute talismanic figure there, particularly obviously after Harry Kane left. I did write a piece, I think it was sort of 2/3 of the way through last season, sort of suggesting with the ultimate respect, because I like him as a player, I like him as a guy when I've had interactions with him. He's a phenomenally nice guy. But there were signs that he was coming to the end a little bit, that, he wasn't having the impact that he had in matches, that he was, the big sign really, he was being taken off when Spurs needed a goal or they were chasing a game. And that just obviously would never have happened a year or two ago, let alone 3, 4, 5 years ago, when he was an absolutely essential part of the team and one of the best wide players in the Premier League. But he's not there anymore. They obviously didn't get the Morgan Gibbs-White deal over the line, which was a significant blow to them. And they've now lost James Maddison for probably the vast majority, if not all, of the season. So you can see from some of the players that they're targeting. We talked about Savino. We can talk about Eberici Eze as well. He's another one that they're looking at in the market this month, that they feel they need more creativity. They need a little bit more dynamism and firepower. And I think they felt that before they lost Maddison and they didn't get Gibbs-White. So you can see that they're scrambling a little bit, I think, in the window now to get things done.
I mean, Spurs are obviously coming off a season, a disastrous domestic campaign where they finished sort of 17th, but also have won a trophy for the first time in years. They've got a change of manager, new players, presumably more new players will follow before the deadline. I mean, sat here now, what does a successful season for Spurs look like?
Well, it used to be, I could just say win a trophy, couldn't I?
Well,
that's what I could have said for 17 years. But no, I mean, look, internally, it's the competing on four fronts line. That is a clear mantra that has been set at all levels of the club. That is what they expect to do. I think if Spurs get Champions League and they can win the domestic cup, then they've had a great season. I mean, we can't really sit here and talk about them as serious Champions League contenders, can we? It just doesn't feel as though they're anywhere near that. And again, in terms of, we're talking about leaps earlier about the Antonio Conte Chelsea side that went from 10th to 1st. I mean, can you go from 17th to 1st? I'm not sure that's a realistic jump either. Well, yes, that's true. That's true. The new Leicester, sure they'll like that branding. It just doesn't feel to me as though that is realistic, and I don't think many Spurs supporters will turn up on the first day of the season expecting they're going to win the league. But yeah, I mean that stadium, that club, everything is built towards Champions League football. So I think his minimum expectation will be, if we think it's 5 teams again, 5th, and then a serious run at least one of the cup competitions. I mean, that'll be an early test for Thomas Frank. Actually, is that one of the things that Ange Postecoglou got a lot of criticism for, both last season and in his first year, was that he wrote off the Carabao Cup really early. He heavily rotated, didn't take it seriously. We want to win the Premier League, and that, I think that's an interesting change in sort of messaging from Postecoglou to Frank, is that Postecoglou did not hide away from, we want to win the Premier League. This is what we're here to do. They had that great start in his first season where they won, I think it was 8 of their first 10 games. They were unbeaten. They were top of the league. They looked really good. But he embraced that. He didn't play it down. Thomas Frank told me in his opening press conference, when we talked about the gap to the top sides, he recognised that exists. And he said, the 3 big teams in particular, Liverpool, Arsenal and City, are a little bit ahead of us at the moment. And that took me back to Antonio Conte, who used to talk about the gap all the time, the gap to the top, the gap to those top sides. So I think the fact that he's talking in those terms suggests that they're not seriously thinking about the Premier League. They're thinking 4th, 5th, 3rd maybe would be a very good season, I think, if they could sort of crack into that top 3 somehow. And clearly they've got a taste for winning now. If he can deliver a trophy, it took Ange 2 seasons, but it took Spurs managers 17 overall. If Thomas Frank can deliver one in his first season, that will really, I think, help him grow into the role. Because I think you're right. He's an excellent communicator. He's very, very good, privately as well. I've had the opportunity to spend a bit of time with him when he was at Brentford in sort of more informal setting. And you can see why players want to play for him. He's very engaging. He's funny. He's witty. He's self-deprecating. He's everything you kind of want to play for in a manager. But I did sense a little bit of nervousness, I thought, as unveiling. He didn't quite have his ducks in the row with all the questions he was going to get. He was managing a difficult situation with Son, because at the time it wasn't sort of public knowledge, and it hadn't been confirmed that he was definitely going to leave. There was that interest from Los Angeles, but we didn't know if that was necessarily going to materialise into a transfer. And he was put in a difficult position, but you can sense that he's having to just learn the ropes a little bit. He's told a story that he likes to go out for a run very early in the morning, and he could do that when he was Brentford manager. But I think there's been a conversation with him that he might not be able to do that quite so freely as Tottenham manager. It's little things like that where he has to just maybe adapt and realise, okay, this is a bigger club. There's more eyes on me now. I just have to sort of embrace the slightly more statesman-like aspect of that kind of role than maybe he had to do at Brentford, where, of course, he was very safe, very secure. There was sort of some of the Spurs executives, I think, sort of joked that he had the safest job in football there, and he's come to Spurs where they have a high turnover of managers. So, the expectation on him in particular is going to be very different.